Hi everyone, my name is Sihem Bensalah and I'm a PhD student at Yonsei University. So this presentation is titled Necroscopic Jouissance and Postmortem Capitalism, the Visceral and Ethical Unmaking of the Human Condition in Squid Game. So more easily and also more essentially, it will be something like horses, human, what's left of humanity in Squid Game. So the final episode of season 3 is titled Saramun, which translates to Humans Are in English, ending on these existential questions about humanity itself. So Squid Game was originally conceived as a single season series. In the last episode of the first season, Ki-hoon, the main character, asks the frontman about the games. He replies, "You like horse racing, right? You're like horses. It's interesting. I didn't expect you to run that fast." So this metaphor crystallizes the series' core mechanism, the systematic reduction of human beings into spectacle and betting fodder. So Squid Game transforms individuals into objects of calculation, instrumentalized as entertainment and profit. Yet, paradoxically, it ultimately invites reflection on what remains of humanity when ethical, emotional, and relational dimensions have been stripped away. So, this questioning of humanity culminates in the final game of Season 1, set beside the deathbed of the game's creator. He proposes one last bet to Ki-hoon, saying, "If this man remains there until midnight, I win. If someone helps him before then, you win." This ultimate bet is not about money nor survival. It is an existential gamble on humanity itself. In this presentation, I explore how Squid Game is structured to systematically strip away each layer of the player's humanity, reducing them to instruments within a meticulously engineered spectacle of death. Human lives are rendered disposable, and their suffering and fear are staged to evoke a visceral, scopophilic jouissance. Death becomes capital, an ultimate and absolute expenditure that both horrifies and fascinates. This spectacle, crafted for entertainment of the wealthy, reveals a grotesquely distorted political order. While it's masquerade as fair competition and meritocracy, it is in fact governed by surveillance, sovereign violence, and necropolitics, which is the power to determine who lives and who dies. Within this framework, Squid Game stages a corporeal and effective unmaking of the human condition, prompting us to ask what, if anything, remains of humanity. So, in Squid Game, the process of player selection functions as a form of social autopsy. A symbolic diagnosis of individuals already subjected to what Orlando Patterson defines as social death. So it's a condition marked by structural exclusion, invisibility, and the erosion of agency. The participants are not arbitrarily chosen. Rather, they are deliberately selected because they are entangled in an inescapable financial crisis, crippling debt that has already condemned them to a slow social death. Within the logic of late capitalism, these debts serve as a marker of disposability, rendering their bodies primed for commodification. While players enter the game without knowledge of one another's personal identities, their awareness of each other's debt amount fosters a shared consciousness of their precariousness. In doing so, the game stages a necropolitical calculus wherein the worth of life is assessed through the lens of economic indebtedness. Only those deemed socially and financially dead are conscripted into this hyper-violent spectacle of capital extraction. The player's past, shaped by systemic failure, marginalization, and dispossession, are reappropriated to rationalize their transformation into biocapital, anonymous bodies stripped of individuality and reduced to a mere instrument in a game that literalizes the brutal mechanics of capitalist exploitation and sacrificial logic. So after identifying a potential recruit, the recruiter invites them to play Takti, a children's game that functions as a ritualized threshold into the larger spectacle of Squid Game. Drawing on affect theory, which foregrounds the circulation of emotions and bodily sensations as social and economic commodities, Takchi literalizes the conversion of both corporeality and pain into capital. The slap exchange for the possibility of a small monetary gain is not merely a punishment, but an effective microtransaction, a moment in which the player's shame, vulnerability, and willingness to endure violence are temporarily monetized. This dynamic reflects what Laurent Berlin described as emotional or affective capitalism, wherein the economic system capitalizes not only on physical labor, but also on the emotional and affective capacities of subjects. By consenting to this humiliation, the player enacts a symbolic form of social death, signaling their willingness to relinquish bodily autonomy and subjectivity and subjective agency. So in this sense, Takchi prefigures the ultimate logic of the games, wherein effective dispossession gives way to a literal commodification of the body, thus encapsulating a continuum of capitalist extraction that spans from affect to the flesh. So once they consent to participate in the game, the players are assembled and anesthetized, their bodies rendered unconscious and entirely passive. In this suspended transit, they experience both spatial dislocation and temporal suspension, a state of enforced derealization that stages a symbolic death, priming them for a rebirth into a hyper-real order governed by a different logic of power, spectacle, and survival. This liminal passage functions as an ontological reset, a rebirth into a world where survival and spectacle collapse into one another, and the only remaining drive is the desperate pursuit of economic and existential resurrection. So through careful cinematic staging, the clinical sedation, ritualistic undressing and redressing, the sterilized liminality, etc., the series stages a ritualized transition. The players' bodies are re-scripted as passive objects within a vast dehumanizing theater of hyperreality, severed from the logic of everyday life and reanimated solely by the promise of redemption through violence, chance, and capital. So, Jean Baudrillard's concept of simulation describes a condition in which representation no longer reflects reality, but instead generate a reality of their own, disconnected from any original reference. So in his 4 stages of simulation, the image first reflects reality, then it distorts it. Eventually, it masks the absence of reality, and finally, it becomes pure simulation, a self-contained system of science. And hyperreality, to make it simple, is the experience of being in this simulation. So, as an example, Baudrillard uses Disneyland as a way to define simulation. Disneyland is a fantasy world, something separate from everyday life. By seeing Disneyland as a simulation, it makes us accept the everyday life as the real. But Baudrillard argues that the world outside of Disneyland, for example American everyday life, is also fake in its own way. It is shaped by consumerism, media, and constant images, just like Disneyland. So the fantasy of Disneyland hides the fact that the rest of the world is also a kind of simulation. We just don't question it because we are so used to it. In this way, what we call reality is actually kept alive by all these artificial layers. So in Squid Game, what is interesting is that the boundary between reality and simulation collapses into a hyperreal spectacle. So the game does not merely imitate capitalist exploitation, it amplifies it and aesthetizes it, turning social violence into entertainment. While the game world appears as horrific, effectively distracting both players and viewers from the ongoing violence of the real, this violence is still very visible and present in the world. So for example, Gi-hun's life outside the game is marked by brutal biopolitical precarity. He is coerced by loan sharks who threaten to harvest his organ if he fails to repay his debts. So this real-world threat mirrors the game, which demands players' lives and bodies as collateral. So although the game pretends to uphold democratic ideals, offering equal opportunities through the vote, assigned roles, and the choices, this facade of fairness constitutes what Baudrillard would call a post-democratic illusion. It is a simulated agency, a hollow semblance of choice that conceals a structurally violent and preordained system. The spectacle thus produces the appearance of freedom while obfuscating the deterministic operations of power and capital beneath its gamified surface. Finally, the symbolic weight of this tension is further underscored by the title of the second episode, Hell. While it may initially evoke the brutality of the game, the episode actually depicts the player's return to the real world, a place so oppressive and violent that it drives them back into the deadly simulation of the game. So this dynamic reveals how Squid Game operates not only as a simulation, but also as a critique of the collapsing distinction between the real and the simulated. The real world, far from offering refuge, is itself a space saturated with systemic violence and dehumanization, reflecting a hyperreality where the mechanism of capitalist exploitation and suffering are as grotesque and omnipresent as those within the game. Another interesting thing is that this simulation operates through both surveillance and scopic desire. So I borrowed the notion of scopic desire from Sartre, who theorized the urge to see as a fundamental human impulse, as important and essential as eating or sleeping. So for him, to see is to possess. Vision becomes a means of domination, a way for men to conquer the world. Squid Game is structured around this dual logic of the gaze, offering both control and jouissance through its panoptic architecture. So a striking example of this is the scene designed like a merry-go-round, which replicates Foucault's model of the panopticon and acts as a mise en abîme of surveillance itself. So the masked VIPs watch from above with a godlike panoptic gaze, while we as viewers mirror their position, complicit in the conception of suffering as spectacle. This recursive setup collapses distance and implicates us as voyeurs within this hyper-real economy of image. So through this layered staging, Squid Game dramatizes the postmodern condition in which autonomy is simulated, bodies are disciplined and commodified, and the illusion of freedom is maintained through spectacle. So by scopophilia, I refer to this desire to see, the voyeuristic pleasure or jouissance derived from looking. In Squid Game, this pleasure emerges not only from acts of surveillance, but also from the visual beauty of the games, which are staged as aesthetic tableaux and choreographed performances. Group games emphasize synchronicity and uniformity, with players' identical outfit and synchronized movements. Death is met by those who are visually marked as out of tune with this collective rhythm, as visible in the first game where the giant doll, a symbolic surveillance apparatus, shoots anyone who moves out of sync. In this context, the gaze becomes lethal. This is what I term necroscopia, aestheticizing the violence that ensues what individual impulse disrupts collective discipline. So this orchestrated choreography transforms the games into spectacles of disciplined beauty, while simultaneously revealing the fragility of social cohesion under sovereign and capitalistic regimes. The ideal of harmony recurs throughout the series, particularly in group challenges like the six-legged race and the tug-of-war, where survival depends not only on strength, but on the precise collective synchronization. In this way, death becomes aesthetized, not only through beautiful settings, but through the spectacle of enforced harmony itself. Death scenes are rendered both horrific and strangely beautiful, producing an uncanny yet captivating atmosphere layered with symbolic meaning. So, an example of the complex layering of meaning in Squid Game, particularly the interplay between beautiful harmony and horrific violence, can be found in the cinematographic intertextuality of its mise en scène. In the frontman's bedroom, his brother discovers a book of Vincent van Gogh on his desk. The song accompanying, like the first massacre in episode 1, is Fly Me to the Moon and Let Me Play Among the Stars. The most horrific episode of season 3 is titled Starry Night, directly referencing Van Gogh's famous painting with the same title that depicts the night view from his asylum room. The painting's swirling stars are widely interpreted as an expression of Van Gogh's deteriorating mental health during his bipolar episodes, a period when he explored themes of mortality, the cycle of life, and the profound beauty found even in the darkest time. This intertextual reference further echo in the game's setting itself, evokes the tragic tension between beauty and suffering, creativity and destruction, and the oscillation that permeates both Van Gogh's life and the narrative fabric of Squid Game. So similarly, the frontman embodies this duality. Once a player himself, he now perpetuates the game's brutal logic, caught in the bipolar tension between hating the system that dehumanized him and becoming part of it, as if humanity is doomed and incapable of salvation. Humanity cannot be saved because it is fundamentally divided between the powerful and the powerless, a division that Squid Game vividly brings to life in this very episode. In the game, half of the players receives knives, while the other half hold keys. Survival depends on those with the knives killing others, while those with the keys must find a way to escape. This scenario enacts what Michel Foucault theorized as droit de glaive, which is the right of sword, which defines sovereign power as the absolute and unilateral authority to decide who lives and who dies. Traditionally, this power was exercised openly and visibly by the sovereign, who claimed the right to execute or punish bodies as a demonstration of control. However, in Squid Game, this sovereign power is no longer direct or visible. Instead, it is concealed and distributed. The organizers act as hidden sovereigns who design and enforce the deadly rules of the game, creating a space where death is the ultimate condition for survival and victory. The knife becomes a powerful symbol of this sovereign violence, but it is wielded indirectly through the coerced action of the player themselves. This shift from direct execution to mediated violence reveals how modern forms of biopolitical and necropolitical powers operate through systems that mask their true authority, often under the guise of choice and self-governance. Indeed, while the game appears to grant players a democratic right to choose their role before the game begins, this choice is only a simulation of agency. It functions as a disciplinary mechanism that enforces obedience and enhances the spectacle's dramatic and intensity. The structure of the game ensures that violence, whether killing or dying, is inevitable, forcing players into this deadly cycle of mutual destruction. At the heart of this mutual destruction lie the bodies of the losers. I propose to read the treatment of corpses in Squid Game as the materialization of the cadavre exquis, or exquisite corpse. Popularized by André Breton, the cadavre exquis is a surrealist technique or game that functions as a collective assemblage, combining disparate parts, so whether text or images, to form a composite whole, thereby generating meaning through fragmentation. So interestingly, organ harvesting in the series literalizes this concept by reconstructing the bodies of the wealthy with foreign parts extracted from the body of the losers. framing it as a capitalist mode of extraction. A group of staff members covertly organizes the harvesting and sale of organs on the black market, thereby transforming the corpses left after the game into biocapital. This postmortem commodification is symbolically introduced in Season 1 through the extraction of an eye, the first organ being extracted, a highly significant motive. In this economy, power is linked to the capacity to see and to enjoy and to achieve jouissance from it, rendering the extraction of sight itself even after death as a metaphor for the ultimate dispossession and commodification of both body and self within the logic of postmortem capitalist exploitation. The narrative arc of Squid Game ultimately unfolds as a closed cycle. The series begins with Ki-hoon betting money he has stolen from his mother, intended as a birthday gift for his daughter, on a horse race, effectively gambling away his responsibilities as both a father and a son. This initial act of failed kinship and misplaced hope set the stage for his entry into the game, where he himself becomes the object of a bet. The reversal is stark, from gambler to pawn. Ki-hoon's trajectory encapsulates the recursive logic of a system in which individuals are no longer agents of risk, but have become the commodities through which capital circulates. Ki-hoon's final words are, "We are humans." So by protecting player 222's baby, so a symbolic figure of innocence and uncorrupted potential, Ki-hoon enacts an ethic of care rooted in interdependence and responsibility. I don't think he actually commits suicide, but that he chooses to sacrifice his impure self, marking a significant shift from a libidinal economy driven by individual survival to an altruistic logic of centered on the preservation of innocence and the promise of human and even humane continuity. So Ki-hoon's sacrifice challenges this sovereign logic by transforming his body into a site of resistance rather than a mere spectacle, or at least using spectacle to make his resistance even more visible. So the system itself persists, now transposed to the United States, signaling the transnational migration of capitalist necro-spectacle. But within this rigid structure, Ki-hoon's sacrifice and his act introduces a fracture, a minimal but crucial affirmation of humanity's capacity for care and collective survival. So his final sacrifice is not a direct overthrow of the system, but a radical offering that privileges futurity over individual survival, thus reclaiming the human from the status of disposable horses and reasserting the ethical potentiality of the subject. Although all the players in Squid Game are marginalized, some face more profound forms of ostracization, not merely because of their indebtedness, but due to intersecting layers of exclusion. So retirement and rendered unproductive in the eyes of society, defection from North Korea, undocumented foreign worker, or transgender identity. What is particularly striking is that the final appeals to humanity in the series emerges from these very margins. The actions and death of these characters become acts of ethical resistance, each embodying a plea for dignity, solidarity, and compassion. Player 122, Hyun-joo, sacrifices herself to protect 3 generations of women. Ali dies because of his unwavering faith in human goodness and his instinct to protect others. Noel embarks as a moral crusade to save a father, enabling his reunion with his sick daughter. And finally, Kumja dies in a gesture of redemptive sacrifice after killing her own child to save a young mother and her baby. So these moments suggest that the most profound expressions of humanity trust, sacrifice, care, and moral courage emerge not from positions of power or privilege, but from the dispossessed. The marginalized becomes the ethical compass of the narrative, challenging dominant notions of worth and reminding us that the capacity for humanity persists most resiliently in those denied it by society.